we're picking up here where we left off in the previous example. And just to reiterate, we just added a component to Eclipse to allow us to get rid of some of the errors that were being thrown. And then I'm just going to run this little application. This is the first one out of chapter 14, and you can see uh, the results. All right, so I'm going to jump uh, back over to our text now. And now that we've seen how this works, um, we can look at the code one more time just to get a little bit of clarity once again. Now notice that the entire application is an extension of that first import, which is the JavaFX application class, and that is why we have an extends here. So we have our own little class, and it's an extension of the one that already exists so that we can pull in its resources. We do an override, and then we run this little method here to allow us to do a start. We pull in primary stage. We set up a button. We set up a scene, give it a size. We give the button a name. We set the title for the stage. We set the scene, and then we show it. And that's part of that particular method there. And then we do our main method to get everything to launch, and the syntax there is application.launch and your arguments. And then, of course, this was the result. All right. Now they go through here and they explain in detail, probably a little bit better than I just did, what was going on with the code. And it's a good idea to take a look at this stuff and read it in detail. I don't want to read it back to you, but I'll hit the highlights as to what I think is important. But I think that hearing it from me and then reading it and then trying it, that should kind of help you fill in all the gaps that you might be missing. Now, the interesting thing about working uh, with graphical components is we don't need to have just one uh, particular stage. We can actually have multiples. So here they're showing a little bit of a diagram as to this whole concept of stage, scene, and button. And the stage is really the entire window itself. The scene is the part that sits, everything that sits inside of it. And then the button, in this case, is a component that sits inside of the scene. So it is possible to actually have multiple stages, and in this next example here, they talk about that and demonstrate that. And let's actually go through and look at some of the syntax that they're using here. You can see that they're importing many of the same libraries. We once again extend application. We do our override to get things going, and then we have our method here that we call start, and you can see that there's a little bit extra here. Now notice that we once again have a scene, new scene, and then we're kind of stacking things, and in that we're also creating the button and declaring the parameters all in one fell swoop. So that's kind of a powerful little syntax too. If you are not comfortable with that, and I say this with every coding language, using like abbreviated syntax or squeezing a lot of things in together, just do it in separate lines, like it was in the previous example. They do not need to be together. But I think the point here is that you can, and that's a technique that you see when you get a little bit more advanced with your programming skills, that you'll find those techniques to be useful for you. At least that's my experience. Okay, so here in this next little segment, we are setting up what's called the primary stage. We're setting the title again. We're setting the scene. So that's so that we can get it onto the stage area, and then we're going to show it. Now, we keep coming down here, and in this next little segment, we are actually creating a second stage. And then we're setting up a title for it, setting up a new scene with another button, and then we are showing. It says here, it says, note the main method is omitted in the listing since it is identical for every Java FX application. From now on, we will not list the main method in our Java source code for brevity. So it doesn't mean it's not there. So please keep that in mind. We still need to have this part there to make it go. But they're not showing that just simply because, okay, that it's always going to be the same. It's always going to be there to make the window go. So let's go ahead and give that one a shot. I'm going to pause to find my source file, and then I'll be right back. Okay, now I'm going to bring the code in. I'm going to go ahead and create a new class. And this one was called, I think, multiple stage demo. I'm going to go ahead and click finish. And then since I've already copied all the code, and once again I'm going to remove the package file here. Here is that example. Now notice that they have the public static void commented it out. Okay, so it says that the main method is only needed for the IDE with limited Java FX support, not needed for running from the command line. So let's see if that's actually the case. I'm going to go ahead and save this, and now I'm going to go ahead and run this file. And you can see that it did not launch. So now I'm going to uncomment that, and I'm going to run it again. And you can see now that we have our second stage. And what I was trying to do is like grab the title bar and move it, but it's not letting me. So you can see there that you get that two-stage effect. All right, so let's move on to our next example. Okay. All right, here they have a few questions for you. If you want to go ahead and read through those, feel free. All right, let's move on to the next topic here, which is panes, user interface controls, and shapes. And now notice right underneath that title it says panes, UI controls, and shapes are subtypes of node. So those are a subcomponent of that particular thing, and we're going to be working with it and kind of getting the feel for how it all goes. Now, an interesting thing that happens when you're working with this stuff, and this is a technique I try to teach when I teach HTML and CSS, is the idea of encapsulating things into other things in order to have better control over them. And that's kind of how nodes work. And you know, they're talking here about how you put the button onto the stage and the scene, and how it takes up the whole space no matter what you do. And then there's tools where it says you can fix the problem by setting the position and size of a button. However, that's not always the best approach. In fact, if you take a look at this little graphic again, we have our stage and our scene, and then we set up a pane which sits inside the scene, and then we have nodes that sit inside of there. So in other words, we would set up a container that would hold the button and actually size the container as opposed to sizing the button. And that way we have just another level of control over an object. Now, if you look at this document or this like flowchart thing here, you can see this like layout and the hierarchy that goes with it. So, starting at the top with the stage and then moving on down to the scene. From there, we create nodes where we first start with the parent, so that's where the pane sits, and then we also have the node, and then from the node we can control certain things. So for example, within a node structure we can control the shape, and notice all the different types of shapes that we can apply, and we can put in images. For the parent, um, we can also throw in controls, and it says such as a label, a text field, button, checkbox, and all the common form elements that we're used to working with. And then you have the pane, which sits on the same level as the control. And from there we can use these particular tools that are using names that are somewhat unique to Java, so flow pane, grid pane, etc. So you'll see how that works a little bit better as we move along, but the tie-ins are important, and that concept of like kind of encapsulation and then what components you can apply to those certain areas, that's pretty useful. Okay, let's look at this next section of code here. Now, I want you to notice that we are adding a library now, and that would be the StackPain library, so scene, layout, StackPain. And the difference here is going to be these couple of extra little components. So we're creating an instance of StackPain, and then we're going to use this method here to get children and add a new button. Now, notice that here where we're creating the scene, we also call out pane and then give that pane a size, and therefore when the button appears inside that pane, it will force itself into that particular structure. So let's see if we can get that code to run. Once again, give me a moment to grab my source. Okay, to demonstrate another little way of doing this, I'm going to show you an approach that you may have used maybe when you're working with Visual Studio. But here's all the source files that are present from our author. And I'm just actually going to grab this particular file, and I'm going to drag it over and drop it into the default package. And you can see I'm going to choose copy file so it doesn't alter the original, and then it drops it in. Now it is throwing an error. You can see it says the declared package, chapter 14, does not match the expected package. So let's go ahead and give that a double click and open it up, and that really is referring to this particular thing. Now I can either remove that, or if I wanted, I could also change it to match the package name, which is my Java FX, and that's the name of the package file here. Now it's still throwing an error, and I really don't want to get too mired in this right now. So let's go ahead and just get rid of it, because that's not really critical at the moment. We're going to save it, and you can see the error went away. And let's go ahead and run this and see what it does. Alright, so now you can see that it creates the button and it sits within the pane, so it is now a controlled object, so it's not taking up that whole entire space. Okay, let's move on. And they are showing you here what you should get as an effect. Alright, now let's try something different. In this next one, we are going to be um, working on creating a circle. Um, I do actually want to address this paragraph that comes right before, and I don't want to skip over it. It says the program creates a stack pane on line 11, adds the button as a child of the pane on line 12. So that I think I explained before, but the concept of how you get it in there, you just got to be really careful of this syntax and follow it. Now, if you were to type that in manually, you would see that Eclipse would try to guide you. So if I were to, do this, notice how it does kind of like the autocomplete, like Visual Studio does. And some people find this very helpful. Some people find it to be an annoyance. But it's not quite as rich as Microsoft's IDE, but it sure is pretty powerful when it comes right down to it. Okay, let's go back and work on this circle one. Now notice with the circle one, we have a couple of different things that are happening. First thing that we're doing is we are actually pulling in a library that allows us to do shapes, and we're picking a circle, and we're also pulling one in that's called paint, which allows us to do color. So that's two new things that are being added. In order to actually create the circle, we invoke a new instance of circle. We set a couple of points. So we set the center point for X and Y at the 100 uh, pixel point. So remember, on computers, 0, 0 is up here, so 100 over and 100 down. Then we also set the radius to 50. We set a stroke and a fill. And the stroke, of course, is the line, and then the fill is what goes inside. We will then create a pane so that it sits inside of a pane. We'll do the get children thing again, and we'll add a circle. And then we set up the scene, we grab the pane, give it some dimensions for the overall object, title, scene, and show, and then we go from there. So let me go ahead and grab that code once again. And the name of it was, it's funny how short our memories are sometimes, show circle. Alright, let's bring that code up on the screen. And hopefully you can see the size of my code okay. I keep forgetting that I have a higher resolution screen, and sometimes it's kind of nice to get a zoom in. So here's a way you can bump up your font size if you care. There's no quick little shortcut, unfortunately, but once you know where to go, which is under your window, menu, preferences, and then you go to general, appearance, colors and fonts, and then you come right here to where it says Java Editor Text Font. You just click edit and then just choose a bigger size. So I'm just going to jump mine up to 12 point and apply it. So that should be a little bit easier for you to read. Now once again, we are seeing that we have this error here for the chapter 14 package, which we don't need. I'm going to go ahead and save it. You can see the error goes away. And let's go ahead and launch this and see what happens. And there is our circle. It is very exciting, I know, but it does do exactly what we said, and that is we have a radius of 50. So if this is 100, we're going to be 100 over and 100 down, and this is basically the stroke, the edge, and then the fill is the stuff in the middle. Now, that's exactly what we told it to do here, and if we wanted to change that, we could here and just do the same thing, run it again, and now you can see that it's filled black. And so it's not really that hard to start coming in here and just tweaking some of these things. And you can see now I've managed to push it off the stage because of the center of Y, but I could have changed that to something smaller, I suppose, instead of something bigger, and then you can see the result. So how I can move it around. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and close that one, and let's keep moving on. Okay, so they do talk about that coordinate system. You guys should already know this from working with HTML and CSS, because that's how web pages work too, where 0, 0 is in the top corner, and then the X and Y increase in the positive value radiating from that. And that's really not that difficult a thing. All right, so let's go on to another new concept here, and this is something that we call property binding. And you can see in the italicized text here, it says you can bind a target object to a source object. A change in the source object will be automatically reflected in the target object. So what's cool about this is it kind of, you know, it's kind of like putting a dog on a leash in a sense, in that by having the leash, the dog is bound to his owner. So if the owner is taking the dog for a walk, the dog must follow. If the owner turns right, the dog turns right, etc. Or at least that's the ideal, right? Not everybody's dog behaves quite so well. Let's move on and see how this is going to affect our application here. So the first little tidbit is to look at all the things that we're importing and see if there's anything new there. And I don't see anything new, so we're going to be using some of the same. But what we're going to do now is we are going to set up binding. All right, so we are going to create a new circle, and then once again we're going to set the X and the Y, but now we're going to bind the width property, and we are also going to bind the height property. And now we're binding the pane height and the pane width, and then we are going to divide by 2. So the one way to look at it is if the pane is 400 pixels, the circle will be 200 pixels, just for an example. Now here on line 18, now we're also going to be setting the radius to 50, so it's going to be a same size circle. Stroke to black, color to white, and then we're going to do the get children and add circle thing, and then let's see what happens. So let's get this code over there. This one's called show circle centered, so I'm going to go grab that code here. Okay, and let's open that one up. Let's get rid of that package. Save it. Okay, and you can see this is exactly the code that we had in the book. Let's go ahead and click run. You see there's our stroke. I mean, basically the same thing that we saw before, but this time it is being generated by virtue of a relative size. So it's being bound to the size of that pane. Let's go ahead and close that. Let's see what our book has to say about it. All right, so the key concept here, keep in mind, is that when you change the source object, you'll automatically change the target object. So now the question is, which is the source and which is the the target, or which is the one that's drawing from it. Now with this next little tidbit here, I do want to actually make sure that we get this, so I'm going to kind of read this to you. Um, and maybe I should backtrack here a second. It says the circle class has the center X property for representing the X coordinate circle center, which I think we've already discovered. This property, like many, can be used both as a target and a source in a property binding. The target listens to the changes in the source and automatically updates itself once a change is made in the source. So in other words, it binds with the source using the bind method as shown here. Now, they have a few different ways that they bind. So keep in mind now that JavaFX has its own little library of things that we're pulling from, but the property is a particular thing that is defined in there, and the way that we're going to apply it is where I think it kind of unlocks how it works. So, all right, let's take a look at the little example that they have here, and keeping in mind that they have this thing here where, by virtue of the fact that we're using a binding property, it has this little get and set built into it, so that we can, in order to bind to it, we have to grab it and then set it and then adjust with it. Okay, so here it shows that X is a binding property, and here it shows that center X is a binding property. So the example then starts with some particular class name. So, and this will have a property type of X. We'll do a get, we'll do a set, and then we'll do the property type at the bottom to do the X property. So we compare that to that of a circle, and it works in essence the same way. So there's no real trick to it. It's just understanding that really it is just another class file that we're pulling from. All right, so in this little bit here, look at that little bit of code. It says circle center X property, so that is pulling from here, and then we are binding the pane width property and dividing by 2. So in other words, this long syntax we have here is easily replaced with just the bind with divide by 2. So you can see that there's a significant amount of truncating that happens here in order to make our work a little bit easier, because they have basically this structure already built for us that allows us to make those adjustments without such a complex statement. So with this next little example here, I'm actually not going to go through the trouble of bringing it up into the computer and running it, but we are going to look at the code, because we can see the output right here, and we're not generating any graphics at this point. But we are applying these libraries that give us the binding feature. So we do the JavaFX beans property, and then we do double property and simple double property, and those, keep in mind, are files that we can pull in through the imports, but you can always come back in here and run this if you really want to see how it works. So the binding demo is present here. Now, the thing that I would ask you to do is read through this real carefully, and then if you want to challenge yourself, you can go ahead and read this. For me, the binding property becomes more apparent as we apply it to certain applications in a practical sense as opposed to looking at it in a theoretical sense. And I think this is a good stopping point for right now. So I'm going to terminate this video here, and then I will be adding subsequent videos for this chapter.